So we'll get started. So I hope you're able to see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So last class, I remember we discussed about fluid statics, right? This was the last problem that we did. So fifth was the last problem that we did. We studied about ideal fluids at rest, and we are doing properties of matter, in which we are concentrating on the mechanical properties of liquids, right? So in today's topic, we are going to discuss about fluids in motion. So that is fluid dynamics. So when we talk about the fluids in motion, you would have heard these terms that there are two kinds of flows that are possible. One is called as a streamlined flow and the other is called as a turbulent flow, right? So what do we understand by this? Right? Can someone tell me what is the difference between streamlined and turbulent flow? So based on what concept are we trying to classify the flow into two types? What is the differentiating factor for?
Direction with which it moves and velocity.
So direction in which? See, for
The liquid at
example,
a given point moves.
liquid at a given point. Okay. Let me say there is a tube like this. Okay. Let's say there is a tube of varying cross-sectional area, inside which there is a liquid that is flowing. Let's say there is a liquid that is flowing like this. Okay. Now, this liquid is going to be a continuous surface. We will not be able to see them as layers. If suppose I break these liquids into layers, let's say layer number 1, layer number 2 like this, I'm taking some random layers between the points A and B of the tube. Okay. Then what exactly should happen to the velocity of each particle at a particular point for it to be called as a streamline flow? Let's try to understand that. Can someone tell me what is the meaning of it? When can I call this flow as a streamline flow? It is when you take a particular cross-sectional area. If there are many particles reaching a particular point, okay, if every particle reaches the particular point with the same velocity, if every particle reaches the same cross-sectional area at the same point with the same velocity, then that kind of a motion is called as streamline motion. In the sense, if suppose you take the layer number 1, okay, when I take the layer number 1, if the velocity of the particle here is v1, and then when it comes to the point 2, if it becomes v2, irrespective of what had been its velocity previously. Similarly, there is another particle here whose velocity, let's say it is v3. When this particle 3 has reached point 2, it should reach with the same velocity v2. For example, if there are two particles I have taken, particle number 1 and 3 I have taken it for reference. If the particle 1 has 5 meter per second here and the particle number 2 has 2 meter per second, at point number 2, if the particle 2 has reached with, let's say, 6 meter per second, then the particle number 3 also should reach this point 2 with the same speed, 6 meter per second. If this kind of a flow is able to take place, then that is what we call it as a streamline flow. That is when the velocity of liquid flow, when a liquid flows such that each particle of the liquid passing a given point moves along the same path and has the same velocity as its preceding particle, then that flow is called as streamline flow or steady flow. In this chapter, our main concept of discussion will be about streamline or steady flow. If this fails, then that is what we call it as a turbulent flow, right? So the layers of liquid that you have broken into is what is called as a streamline, and the tube through which it is flowing is what is called as the tube of flow. And if you take the surface like this, the velocity of every particle is measured at velocity of every particle at a point is measured tangential to it, right? Similarly, when a liquid velocity exceeds a certain limiting value called as the critical velocity, then the liquid starts flowing in a zigzag manner, and the path and the velocity of the liquid particle changes continuously haphazardly. So what will happen is turbulent flow is not easy for us to study. So it is easy for us to study about the streamline flow. So as I told you, we are going to mainly concentrate on the streamline flow. Am I clear, guys? Okay. So there are certain properties with respect to streamlines which are very much similar to the concept of electric field lines, right? In a steady flow, no two streamlines can intersect. Why? Because you can draw two tangents at that particular point and they will have two different velocities at the same point, which is not possible, right? Similarly, the tangent at any point on the streamline gives the direction of velocity of the fluid particle. Third, greater the number of streamlines passing normally through a cross section, larger will be the fluid velocity at that section. Means more close the streamlines are, more will be the velocity of those of that liquid flow at that particular point. Similarly, fluid velocity will remain constant at any point of the streamline, but it may be different at different points on the streamline, like how I told here. At a given point, the streamline velocity is constant, but it is different at different points. So these are all the properties of streamlines. Okay. Next. Next is something called as laminar flow. So what does laminar flow mean? When the velocity of the flow of a liquid is less than its critical velocity, then the liquid flows steadily. Steadily means it will have a streamline motion. So each layer of the liquid slides over the other layer. It behaves as if different lamina are sliding over one another. Such flow is called as laminar flow. It means if you look from the top view, then the liquid layer will appear like this. So lamina means a two-dimensional shape. So if the velocity of the liquids is less than that of the critical, let's see what is critical velocity later. If the velocity of the liquid is less than its critical velocity, then the liquid starts flowing steadily, in the sense it will appear as if one layer is exactly sliding over the other. Then that kind of a flow is what is called as laminar flow. Guys, am I clear till this point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next is, we need to understand what is critical velocity. So what is that critical velocity? So the critical velocity of a liquid is that limiting value, means that maximum value of its velocity of flow up to which the flow is streamlined and beyond which it is going to become turbulent. Right? Generally, the critical velocity is represented by the symbol V with a suffix C. So the critical velocity Vc of a liquid flowing through a tube depends on certain parameters. What are the parameters on which it depends on? One is the coefficient of viscosity. Second, it depends on the density of the liquid. And third, it depends on the diameter of the tube. Okay. So, see, in this chapter, right, most of the derivations, like all these important terms like critical velocity, Reynolds number, all these things are, and Poiseuille's formula, everything is derived based on dimensional analysis. So you people know what it means, right? So what are all the parameters on which it depends on? It depends on the coefficient of viscosity, density, and the diameter of the tube. So how can we write? We can write Vc is directly proportional to neta power A, density power B, and diameter power c. Okay, then Vc will be equal to some k times neta power a, rho power b, and d power c. So once you write that, left hand side should be the dimension. So when this is the expression where k is a dimensionless constant, according to dimensional analysis, what should happen? The dimension of the left side term should be equal to the dimensions of the combined dimensions of the right side expression, right? So once you write that and compare the powers, then we can obtain the value of Vc as k times neta divided by rho into d. So this is what is the formula for critical velocity. Please make a note of it. So I hope it is done. So from this expression, what we can conclude is, you can say that the critical velocity will be large if the value of neta is large, because critical velocity is directly proportional to neta, and the value of rho and d are small. That is, the density of the liquid should be less and the diameter of the tube should be less for its critical velocity to be more. So from this, we can conclude that the flow of liquids of higher viscosity and lower density through narrow pipes tend to be streamlined. Repeating it again, the flow of liquids of higher viscosity and lower density through narrow pipes. Narrow pipes in the sense, the pipes which have smaller diameter, tends to be streamlined. Similarly, the flow of liquids of lower viscosity and higher density through broad pipes tend to become turbulent, because in that case, the critical velocity will be very small. Okay. So this Reynolds number will help us to understand which flow is streamlined and which flow is turbulent. So did you guys make a note of this formula? K times neta divided by rho into d. Wait. Next is Reynolds number. So what is this? So this is a dimensionless parameter whose value decides the nature of the flow of liquid through the pipe. So it is given by this formula. Re is equal to, Re stands for Reynolds number, rho times V into D divided by neta. Is it not like this? V is equal to K times neta divided by rho D. If that K value is taken to be Reynolds number Re, then you rearrange the equation, it will be like this. The only difference is, the previous case, Vc is equal to K times neta divided by rho D, where K is not equal to Reynolds number. If I remove that C, I'm just telling you a method to remember. If I remove that C and rearrange the equation in such a way that K will be equal to rho V into D divided by neta, then that particular expression is what is called as Reynolds number, where rho represents the density of the liquid, V represents the velocity of the liquid, neta represents the coefficient of viscosity of the liquid, and D represents the diameter of the pipe. Okay, so let's see what is the importance of Reynolds number. If Re lies between 0 and 2000, then the liquid flow is considered to be streamlined or laminar. If the value of the Reynolds number is greater than 3000, then the liquid flow is considered to be turbulent. If Re lies between 2000 to 3000, the flow of the liquid is unstable, means it may change from laminar to turbulent and the vice versa. So the exact value at which the turbulence sets in the fluid is what is called as critical Reynolds number. Is that clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
So by the way, I hope you know what is neta, right? Neta represents the coefficient of viscosity. We have not discussed viscosity as of now. I've directly started with what is streamline and turbulent flow. Right. So let us discuss some part of viscosity also, so that you have better clarity on it. So you know what is viscosity, right? So what is the difference between viscosity and friction? Let's first try to understand. So what is viscosity? So viscosity means friction, or can I say resistance between the layers of the liquid. Friction in fluids is what is called as viscosity. Now, so it is technically, it is the definition like this. It is a property of the liquid by virtue of which an internal force of friction comes into play when the fluid is in motion, and which opposes the relative motion between its different layers. Similar is the case with respect to friction as well. In friction also we told that friction will try to resist what? It will not try to resist the motion, rather it will try to resist the relative motion between the surface. Okay. Then the backward dragging force that is acting tangential to the layers of the fluid is what is called as viscous drag or viscous force. And what will it try to do? It will tend to destroy its motion. Okay. So there is another small theoretical concept that you people need to know. Let's see what it is. So we are going to see what is the cost of viscosity. I'm teaching all these theory part because question can be asked in any way. You need to know the theory behind it, not only the formula. Please understand. If there is any doubt, get it clarified. Okay. Suppose I consider a liquid which is moving slowly and steadily over a fixed horizontal surface. Okay. Since we told steady, it is going to be like the layers are flowing over each other. Suppose it is like this. So you have a fixed surface on top of which there is liquid that is flowing. Now this liquid can be broken into many streamlines. So you're able to break them into many streamlines like this. So once you do this, there are certain observations that are taken into consideration. First is, what will happen to the layer of the liquid which is in contact with the fixed surface? The answer to that is, that layer will be at rest. Then what will happen to the velocity of the layers as you move away from the fixed surface? And the velocity of every other layer increases uniformly upwards. That is, as you move away from the fixed surface, then what we can say is the velocity of each layer will consequently increase. Okay, there will be an increase in the value. So due to this, what will happen is there is going to be a relative velocity existing between each layer of the liquid. Okay, suppose I consider any two adjacent layers. I'm not considering random layers. If I take any two adjacent layers, because I'm talking about the friction acting between the layers of the liquid, the consecutive layers of the liquid. If I consider any two adjacent layers A and B, okay, the upper layer in this diagram, if you see, A is the layer which is above and B is the layer which is below. Then the upper fast moving layer A tends to accelerate because it has a greater velocity, so it will tend to accelerate. Okay. The lower, slower moving layer B, what will it try to do? It will tend to retard the fast moving layer A because it is not able to match up with the speed of A. If suppose the speed of this layer is V, then the speed of this layer will be V plus delta V. Since velocity of each layer is not the same, they cannot move at the same pace, right? They cannot move together. So what will happen? The top layer will tend to accelerate and the bottom layer will tend to retard the accelerating layer. As a result of which, what will happen? There will be a dragging force that will come into picture, which will act exactly in the opposite direction, then this force is what is called as the force of friction or viscous drag, which will come into picture to destroy, or which will tend to destroy, the relative motion between them. Okay, and this is the main cause for viscosity. This is how viscosity comes into picture. For example, when I asked you what is the cause of friction, what was it? Friction takes place in solid surfaces. It is the irregularities of the surface. Whereas in the case of the liquid, we don't talk about irregularities. Rather, we are going to talk about the relative motion existing between the adjacent layers of the liquid. Guys, clear?
Yes, sir.
Now we will be looking into some mathematical details of how to calculate this viscous force. Let's see. So that is, we'll first calculate what is this coefficient of viscosity. We'll try to understand. Okay. So as we discussed now, if I take two consecutive layers, for example, if I take the layer P and if I consider the layer Q, which are both of the same cross-sectional area Q, and the velocity of the liquid is like this. If it is V here and if it is V plus dV here, as we move away from the fixed surface, x is small, velocity is small. X plus dx, the velocity is V plus dV, right? Suppose you consider a liquid which is flowing steadily in the form of parallel layers and on a fixed horizontal surface. Consider two layers P and Q which are at distance x and x plus dx from the solid surfaces. Okay. Then there is a parameter which we can define in terms of dV and dx. What is it? In terms of dV and dx, which we call it as dV by dx. What is the technical name for this thing? It is something similar to potentiometer that you have learned this year. I've already told this also. If you're calculating any physical quantity with respect to time, we call it as rate. If you calculate any physical quantity with respect to distance, we call it as gradient. It's called gradient, yes. So this is called as velocity gradient. This year you would have learned something called as potential gradient, means potential changing with respect to distance. Correct? Then dV by dx is called as the rate of change of velocity with respect to distance in the direction of increasing distance, and is called as the velocity gradient. Right? So here it is an empirical relation. It is not, there is no derivation or something. It is observed and it is expressed. So we know that resistive force will act in the opposite direction. So according to Newton, the force of viscosity F acting tangentially between the layers is observed to be directly proportional to the area of the layers in contact. Okay, F is directly proportional to A, and it is also observed to be proportional to the velocity gradient. Okay, that is dV by dx. So when you combine the expressions and write, we can write it as F is directly proportional to A into dV by dx. Okay. Then, if you remove the proportionality symbol, the constant that we introduce is what is called as the coefficient of viscosity, and the negative sign indicates that it is a resistive force. Am I clear, guys? Okay. So this is an important expression for us to remember. F is equal to minus beta into A into dV by dx. The minus sign is only an indication of resistive force. When you're trying to write in terms of magnitude, you write it as neta A into dV by dx. That is, minus sign is ignored. Okay. So all these definitions are only for CBSE that I am not describing. And I'm not discussing. Okay. Next is, we are going to see what are the units or units and dimensions of neta? So if you observe neta, neta can be written as f into dx divided by dv, a into dv. That is, from here you can rearrange it. F into dx divided by a into dv. I suggest you to write this and see. Okay. So what is the dimensional formula of force? It is mlt minus 2. Dimensional formula of area is L square. Dimensional formula of dx is L, and the dimensional formula of dv is LT inverse. So once you write all these and rearrange it, the dimensional formula of neta is M L minus 1 T minus 1. Got it? Okay. So this is the dimensional formula of neta. Now what about the units of coefficient of viscosity? So the CGS unit of coefficient of viscosity, that is neta, is given as dyne second per centimeter square. So what is it? How is it dyne second per centimeter square? Let's try to calculate. So force is measured in dyne divided by area is measured in centimeter square, and dx is measured in centimeter, and dv is measured in centimeter per second. This and this will get cancelled. Second will go up. So dyne second per centimeter square or gram per centimeter per second is what is the CGS unit of neta. Please make a note of this. And this dyne second per centimeter square collectively is what is called as poise. P-O-I-S-E, poise. Okay. Then the SI unit of it is what is called as SI unit. Obviously will be given as dyne will be replaced with Newton, second is second only, centimeter will be replaced with meter. So Newton second per meter square or kilogram per meter per second is what is called as decapoise or poisule. Deca means 10. Okay, it's called as decapoise or poisule. So why it is called as decapoise? It is very simple. Observe. One poisule or one decapoise, both mean the same. Okay, both are equal to Newton per second per meter. Okay. So how much is it? You can either take in terms of Newton per second meter or Newton second meter power minus 2. Both are there, no? Newton second meter power minus 2. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Kilogram per meter per second. Okay. You can take either of them. But since we have a relation between Newton and dyne, we can take this Newton second meter power minus 2. And when you try to write and see, 1 Newton is 10 power 5 dyne. Second is second only. So meter is 10 power 2 centimeter. That is 100 centimeter power minus 2. When you write, you will get 10 dyne second per centimeter square. But dyne second per centimeter square is what is called as poise. So it is 10 times poise. Am I clear till this point, guys? Now see. Let's do some simple problems, then we'll go to the JE level problems. Now see. Just for you to understand how questions will be framed. So there is a metal plate whose dimensions are 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter, which is resting on a layer of castor oil, which is 1 millimeter thick, whose coefficient of viscosity is 1.55 Newton second per meter square. Find the horizontal force required to move the plate with a speed of 2 meter per second. So what would technically, when it is resting on a viscous fluid, what will be the minimum force that is required to move it in the opposite direction? Because if you see the question, they didn't ask about friction. They asked, what are the horizontal force that we need to apply to move the plate with a speed of 2 centimeter per second? Hey, sir, is there?
Yes, sir.
So tell me. So it is very simple, guys. The minimum horizontal force that you need should be greater than or equal, slightly greater than the viscous force. So indirectly in this problem, you are supposed to calculate the viscous force. That's it. Right. So they have given the area that is 25 centimeters square. Dx is how much? 1 millimeter. I hope you are able to understand why I call that as dx, because that is the thickness that is given. That is 10 power minus 3 meter. What is the coefficient of viscosity? It is 1.55. It is 1.55 Newton second per meter square. Find the horizontal force required to move the plate with a speed of 2 centimeter per second. So dV is equal to 2 centimeter per second. So horizontal force will be how much? Neta times A into dV by dx. So their formula. Neta is 1.55. Area is 25 centimeters square. So 25 into 10 power minus 4 meters square. dV is 2 centimeter per second. That is 2 into 10 power minus 2 meter per second. Correct? So 2 into 10 power minus 2 divided by dx is 10 power minus 3. Now, when you solve this, you're going to get the answer. Okay. The reason I'm solving all these is because, see, when it comes to the first problem here, they're asking in terms of terminal velocity and all those things. So you need to understand how to approach the problems with viscosity. Guys, is this clear or not?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm moving on to the next problem. Now look at this. So there is a square metal plate of 10 centimeter side which moves parallel to another plate with a velocity of 10 centimeters per second. Both plates are immersed in water. If the viscous force is 200 dyne and the viscosity of water is 0.01 poise, what is their distance apart? So how much is the distance of separation between them? So since the viscous force is coming to picture, what formula should come to your mind? F is equal to neta into A into dV divided by dx. So here they have given you area, the viscous force and everything. They've given you the velocity also. Your work is to calculate the value of dx. So this is also a simple problem which you guys can solve. Okay. Similar would be the case for other problems also. Maybe we can do this problem alone. Now listen, there is a metal plate of area 0.1 meter square which is connected to 0.01 kilogram mass through a string that passes over an ideal pulley where the pulley is considered to be massless and frictionless as shown in figure 10.24. A liquid with a film thickness of 0.3 millimeter is placed between the plate and the table. When released, the plate moves to the right with a constant speed of 0.085 meter per second. Find the coefficient of viscosity of the liquid. Okay. This is how it is. 0.01 kilogram. Let's call it as M. Now tell me how to solve. So this plate is moving and there is a film of liquid which is placed of how much thickness? 0.3 mm, which is placed between the plate and the table. When released, the plate moves to the right with a constant speed of 0.085 meter per second. Find the coefficient of
formula, sir.
In the formula.
Sir, mg is equal to
very good.
Minus neta. Okay, veru neta.
Here you will not write minus. That yes, is the external force.
Oh, okay, sir.
Correct? So you will take out the minus neta into A into dV by dx. So m is given, g is given, neta is given.
Illa sir,
oh, that's what we need to find. So neta you need to find. Area of cross section is given. dV is given. dx is given. So dx alone you need to convert it to SI unit and then substitute, you will get the value of neta. Okay, this is a simple problem. But I hope you understood why we are writing this formula, because there is a film that is lying here. Had the same problem been given in the other part of mechanics, that is in the case of friction, what you would have done, you would have taken the frictional force and you would have written mg should overcome that frictional force and it should. Correct? So it is something similar only. So this is the introduction of viscosity. And again, all these points are needed only for CBSE purpose. But if you know the difference, it is more than sufficient. So for understanding, I'll just read it out once. Listen to it. Okay. Now listen. So what are the points of similarity for viscous force and solid friction? That's what we need to understand. So both viscous force and solid friction come into play whenever there is what kind of motion existing? Whenever there is a relative motion existing. That is motion of one object with respect to another, and both should be in contact with each other. So both oppose the motion and both are due to the molecular attractions. So these are the known forces, known facts. Okay. Then what are the points of differences that we need to have in our mind? They are like this. Viscous force is directly proportional to the area of the layers in contact. Whereas when you talk about the frictional force, it is independent of the area of contact. Never we speak about the area of contact with respect to friction. We speak only about the irregularities present on the surface. Whereas with respect to the coefficient of viscous force, we need to understand what is the area of the layers which are in contact with each other. Next. It is directly proportional to the relative velocity between the two layers. Whereas in the case of solid friction, again, we never talk about the relative velocity between the layers. We only know that the relative motion is opposed. That's it. Third, here it is independent of the normal reaction between the two layers of the liquids, whereas solid friction, it depends only on one parameter. What is it? It is the normal reaction that is offered by the surface in contact. It is directly proportional to the normal force that is acting. That is why if you observe the expression here, it is n into A into dV by dx. Here it is just mu into. Okay. Next. The next formula that we are going to see is Poiseuille's formula. Okay, after this, we have something called as Stokes' law, then terminal velocity. With that, viscosity will be over. Then we'll do one problem based on it. Okay, so let's see what is this Poiseuille's formula and what are the assumptions that are used in the derivation. Let's try to understand this, guys. Listen. So here observe the volume of a liquid, that is Poiseuille's formula, the volume of a liquid flowing out per second through a horizontal capillary tube of length L. So I hope you guys know what is a capillary tube. As of now, capillary tube means you can imagine the straw that you use for drinking. Suppose you go to a restaurant and have a cold drink. Let's say when they give you a straw, right? That straw can be considered as a capillary tube. So the volume of the liquid that is flowing out per unit second through a horizontal capillary tube of length L, radius R, under a pressure difference P applied across its end is given by the expression pi into P multiplied with R power 4 divided by 8 times neta into L. And this expression is what is called as Poiseuille's formula. Let's try to understand what is this. So when they say volume of liquid flowing per unit time, volume per time, can I call it as rate of flow of volume? Okay. We generally don't call something changing with respect to time is rate. That's what I told you, right? So we don't call it as rate of flow of volume. Rather, we will only call it as rate of flow, which is represented by the symbol Q. Okay. I'm going to give you one more important expression. See, even before I teach, you would have actually heard this term. There is something called as equation of continuity. Last year, you would have seen where A1 V1 is equal to A2 V2. Irrespective of how it is derived and all those things, I'm sure you would have definitely seen this expression. A1 V1 is equal to A2 V2, where A represents the area of cross section and V represents the velocity. Okay. So whenever I talk about rate of flow of liquid, that can also be called as A into V, because area multiplied with speed is also going to give you volume per unit time. Dimensionally observe, no? Area is measured in meter square. Velocity is measured in meter per second. So meter square into meter is meter cube per second. Meter cube is nothing but volume, second is time. So volume per time is what is called as rate of flow of liquid. So this is an important term that you need to remember, because sometimes they will not tell you it is the amount of volume per time. They'll use the word rate. So at that time, depending on the problem, whether you need to use volume per unit time or area into velocity, you people have to think. So that's what this Q is. And here V represents volume and T represents time. It is given as pi into P, where P is the pressure difference across which the liquid is actually flowing. R is the radius of the capillary tube. Neta is what? The coefficient of viscosity. And L is the length of the capillary tube. Okay. So again, as I told you, the derivation is based on the dimensional formula. This part I'm leaving it to you. So if you just go through it, you can understand it. So you will get the value as K times P into R power 4 divided by neta and 12, because we know that in dimensional analysis, we cannot find out the value of the dimensional constants. So it is experimentally found out to be pi by 8. Okay. Next is Stokes' law. Okay. So in the case of fluids at rest, there are two formulas that we discussed, right? One is Pascal's law, then we would have discussed about Archimedes principle. So when will you know we are supposed to bring in the concept of Archimedes principle? When will you know you don't need that concept? When do we speak about Archimedes principle, guys? Or I'll put the question like this. When will you know that buoyant force has to be used?
Sir, purida.
I'm saying, when will you speak about buoyant force? What is the required condition? If you have a liquid, just by
Partially
taking the
or
liquid,
fully immersed in.
what is needed? Partially or completely? What is needed? Partially or completely?
Immersion.
You need a solid to come in contact with the liquid.
Oh, yes, sir.
That's what I'm asking. So that is the important point. So when a solid comes in contact with the liquid, and if that solid is going to be at rest, okay, then when you speak about the concept of flotation, we speak about the concept of buoyant force. It's a known fact. Similar is the case with respect to Stokes' law. The only difference is, in the case of Archimedes' principle, the object was at rest. It was in contact. It was either partially immersed or completely immersed. Whereas, if you talk about an object which is falling through a viscous fluid, if it is trying to move through a viscous fluid, then what will happen? It will start experiencing a tangential resistive force. Okay. When an object moves through a viscous fluid, the layer of the fluid in contact with the body moves with its velocity. However, the fluid at larger distance from it will remain at rest. That is coming because we know that when the solid part is going to be in contact with the liquid, that particle is going to be at rest. That portion of the liquid will be at rest. So this gives to the relative motion between the different layers of the fluid. So what exactly the solid is doing is, if suppose you have a viscous fluid which is at rest, let's think of honey. You take a small sphere and drop into it, you can actually observe that the layers which are in contact with the solid sphere will be at rest. Whereas the other layers will have a relative velocity between them existing. Okay. And this is happening because the object is experiencing a viscous force which is tending to retard its motion. If you take the solid and drop it under the influence of gravity, it, it will move fast compared to the speed with which it is moving within the viscous liquid. Okay. So the retarding force increases with the increase in velocity of the object. So from this, what we can conclude is there is a law which is called as Stokes' law. The backward viscous force acting on a small spherical body of radius r, moving with a uniform velocity v through the fluid of viscosity neta is given by F is equal to 6 times pi into neta into r into v. This is also derived using the dimensional analysis only. This is the formula you need to remember, and this is what is called as Stokes' law. And the Stokes' law concept is applicable only for a spherical body. It is not applicable for any other shape. It is 6 times pi into neta into r into v, where neta represents the coefficient of viscosity, r represents the radius of the sphere, and v represents the constant velocity with which the spherical object is moving. Clear, guys? So this is all about Stokes' law. Then comes the concept of terminal velocity. So this is the last part with respect to viscosity. Okay. So when you talk about an object which is falling through a viscous fluid, I told you already, it produces a relative motion between its different layers. As a result of which, what will happen is, the object will also start experiencing viscous force, which will tend to retard its motion. The viscous force obviously is going to retard the motion of the object. But as the object is moving down, it is observed that its velocity will increase. Okay. After a particular point, it is observed that its velocity is going to become a constant value. Okay. Now I'm repeating it. Listen. As a result, the object experiences viscous force, which tends to retard its motion. As the velocity of the object increases, the viscous force also increases. Then there will be a particular stage when the weight of the object becomes just equal to the sum of the upthrust and the viscous force. At that point, the velocity attained by the object is what is called as terminal velocity, beyond which the object will start moving with a constant velocity. I will show you the derivation for this. Okay. Suppose a sphere is falling down. What are all the forces that are going to act on this? One will be its own weight, that is mg. Then what else will act? There will be an upthrust, that is the buoyant force that is acting through the center of gravity of it. And thirdly, there will be a viscous force that is acting tangential to it. I'll write it as Fv, where Fv stands for viscous force. Okay. So what we are trying to say is, as the object is moving down, due to its weight, its speed keeps increasing, but the viscous liquid will try to retard its motion. Okay, when the object is trying to increase its motion, it is going to fail because the viscous force is actually trying to retard it. So as the velocity keeps increasing, there will be a particular point where it will attain a dynamic equilibrium, to be more specific. Dynamic equilibrium in the sense, the net force acting on the object is going to be zero, but the velocity is not zero, means the object still continues to move. At that point, it starts attaining a velocity called as terminal velocity. So under dynamic equilibrium condition, can I write mg is equal to Fv plus Fb? Accepted. Now, what is going to be the density of the, what is going to be the mass of the solid? It is the density of the solid into 4 by 3 pi r cube into g will be equal to, can you tell me what is the viscous force, guys? What is the viscous force that is acting? Just now I told you, it is Stokes' law. That is 6 pi neta times r into v. And this velocity is called as terminal velocity plus buoyant force formula also you guys know. So what is the buoyant force formula? It is the density of the liquid multiplied with the volume of the solid that is into it multiplied with g. Right. So what is going to get cancelled? Pi is gone. R square. R square. So 4 by 3 into r square g, can I write it as rho minus sigma, is equal to 6 times neta into Vt. So this will be 2 times, this will be 3 times, which implies the terminal velocity is equal to 2 by 9 times r square into g into rho minus sigma, the whole divided by neta. So 2 by 9 times r square g into rho minus sigma, the whole divided by neta. Done? Is there any doubt?
No, sir.
Okay. Now listen. So this is all about viscosity. So let's do a problem which is based on that concept. So can you guys try this? So there is a solid sphere of radius r which acquires terminal velocity v1 when falling through a viscous fluid having a coefficient of viscosity neta. The sphere is broken into 27 identical solid spheres. If each of these spheres acquires a terminal velocity v2 when falling through the same fluid, then the ratio v1 by v2 is equal to what? How to do?
Sir, 9 as the answer.
I have to check.
Yes, sir. 9 is 2.
9 is the answer. Others? No, sure. So how did you do?
Sir, volume 1 வந்து 4/3 pi r cube, sir. Small capital R.
Okay.
Volume 2 வந்து 4/3 pi r cube pi 27.
Why
So
27?
because sphere is broken down into 27 identical solid spheres.
Okay, then what will happen to its radius?
So radius will be divided by 3.
Yes. So what exactly did you do? Answer
27
9.
I write it as 3 cubes, sir.
That's right. So 27 times.
So since it's directly proportional to r square,
Yes, that's right. So all other parameters are going to be constant, right? So V1 is how much? So V1 will be directly proportional, or I can say V is directly proportional to R square. So V1 by V2 will be equal to small r squared, or I'll write capital R square divided by small r square, because it is broken into smaller parts. So what is the value of small r?
r by 3.
R by 3. So how did you get that R by 3? 27 times 4 by 3 pi small r cube will be equal to 4 by 3 times pi capital R cube. What did they apply? It is nothing but volume conservation. So small r will be equal to capital R divided by 3. So r square divided by r square by 9. This and this will get cancelled. This will go up. V1 by V2 will be equal to 9. That's right. Right. I think this is the only problem that is there. Anyways, so after this, we will discuss about the flow of an ideal fluid. Okay. So based on this, you will have many problems. You are going to mainly see two equations. One is called as the equation of continuity, and the second is Bernoulli's theorem, and we'll do problems based on this. Okay. So what is an ideal fluid? So an ideal fluid is one which is non-viscous, incompressible, and the flow is steady and irrotational. So the ideal fluid should have all these properties. It should be in a steady flow, it should be incompressible, it should be non-viscous, and it should be irrotational. So if you talk about an ideal fluid which is moving through a varying cross-sectional area, so if there is an ideal fluid which is moving through a varying cross-sectional area, then there is a specific set of relation that we can draw between the area of cross-section and the velocity of the liquid at that particular point, in terms of the area of cross-section of other area multiplied with the velocity at that cross-section, which is nothing but A1 times V1 is equal to A2 times V2, where A1 and A2 represents the area of cross-sections at different points, and V1 and V2 are the velocities at different points. Okay. So let's see how it is actually derived, because the derivation can be a part of many problems. You need to know the steps for them. So if I take the area of, if I take a tube of varying cross-sectional area, Let's say here the velocity is v1, okay, and let's say it has got displaced through a distance of delta x. Similarly, here also it has got displaced by the, or I will say delta x1 and delta x2. Okay. Now, this equation of continuity is based on the concept of conservation of mass, because since we are saying this fluid is incompressible, can I say whatever is the mass of the liquid that has got displaced here should be the same mass of the liquid that has got displaced at the other point also. So when I say it is incompressible, it means its density is also going to be constant, right? Now see, what is the mass of the liquid that is between the points A and A dash? So how do we write mass in terms of density and volume? Mass is equal to density multiplied with volume. So if I take the density of the liquid to be rho, then what is the volume of the liquid that is present in the small portion? That is nothing but area of cross section A1 multiplied with delta x1, right? So this will also be equal to rho into A1 into, what is the value of delta x1, guys? It is V1 into delta T. Why did I write V1 into delta T? Because distance is equal to speed into time. So all these things are happening within a time delta T. In the same time delta T, here the displacement would have been BB dash. So at the second portion, can I write it as rho into A2 into V2 into delta T? So if I equate both these expressions, what gets cancelled? Delta T is gone and rho is gone. So A1 times V1 is equal to A2 times V2. Got it? And this equation is what is called as equation of continuity. So from this relation, we can also conclude that area multiplied with velocity is always a constant, and area is velocity is inversely proportional to area of cross section. That is, more will be the velocity if the area of cross section is small. Okay, this is called as equation of continuity. Then we will be discussing about certain terms related to energy of a fluid in steady flow. So one is, there are different energies that are possessed by the liquid. One is called as kinetic energy, the second is potential energy, and the third is called as pressure energy. Okay. So first one is kinetic energy. What is energy? It is the energy possessed by the liquid by virtue of its motion. That's what we call it as kinetic energy. So that's given by the expression half mv square. Right? Then we have something called as kinetic energy per unit mass, which is given by the expression half rho v square. And the third is what is we call it as kinetic energy per weight, which is also called as velocity head. An important term to be kept in your mind. So the kinetic energy per unit weight is what is called as velocity head. And how do we write it as? It is half mv square divided by mg. M and m will get cancelled. V square divided by 2g is going to give you the formula for velocity head. And the next one that we are going to see is kinetic energy per unit volume, which is half mv square divided by volume. M by v is what? It is rho. So half into rho v square is called as kinetic energy per unit volume. Guys, am I clear with this? Next. The next is potential energy. So potential energy is given by the expression mgh. Okay. So potential energy is mgh. What is potential energy per unit mass? It is gh. What is potential energy per unit weight? Potential energy per unit weight is mgh divided by mg. This and this will get cancelled. You will get h, which is called as potential head. So potential energy per unit weight is called as potential head. Similarly, what is potential energy per unit volume? that is mgh divided by V, which is given by the expression rho gh, that is potential energy per unit volume. Okay. Similarly, pressure energy. The energy possessed by body by virtue of its pressure is called as pressure energy. And pressure energy is nothing but work done by pressure. Work done by pressure is given as P into delta V. Sometimes we can write it as P into V also, where V stands for volume. Now, similarly, if I have to define potential energy per unit volume, what is it going to be? It is P into V divided by V. V and V will get cancelled. It is called V. Right? So potential energy per unit volume is nothing but excess pressure that is acting. Then if I have to define potential energy per unit mass, it is given as pressure divided by density. Please make a note of all these points. The question can be anything. Okay. Similarly, the pressure energy per unit weight is what is called as pressure head. That is given by the expression P divided by rho into G. Okay. Am I clear with all these points? So, if you see, you will first define the energy. Second is you will define the energy per unit mass. Then you will define the energy per unit weight. Any energy per unit weight is what is called as that head. For example, kinetic energy per unit volume, unit weight is called as velocity head. Potential energy per unit volume is unit weight is called as pressure head. Similarly, pressure energy per unit weight is what is called as pressure head. That is P divided by rho into G. And the last point is Bernoulli's theorem. Okay. So what does Bernoulli's theorem state? If you have an ideal fluid in your hand which is flowing through a varying cross-sectional area, then the pressure energy per unit volume plus the kinetic energy per unit volume plus the potential energy per unit volume is always a constant at a particular point. I'm repeating it again. For an ideal fluid, the pressure energy per unit volume plus kinetic energy per unit volume plus potential energy per unit volume is always a constant at a particular point. Okay. Please make a note of all these points. Now we will solve few problems which are based on that. Now listen. I think I have shared this paper with you guys, right? So water from a tap emerges vertically downwards with an initial speed of 10 meter per second. Let's say V1 is 10 meter per second. The cross-sectional area of the tap is 10 power minus 4 meters square. Assume that the pressure is constant throughout the stream of water and the flow is streamlined. The cross-sectional area of the stream is going to be how much? Which is 0.15 meter below the tap would be how much? How do I solve this?
Sir, first you have to apply Bernoulli's principle and find V2s.
That's it. Very good. So
Then
if
you
I
can put
take
A1 V1 equal to A2 V2.
here, we don't need A1 V1 is equal to A2 V2 because they never told the cross section is varying. What you told is right. First, second, if I take this as H2, this as H1, what is going to change with respect to height? What is the difference in energies that you will have at point 2 and 1? At 2, what will you have? You will have a greater potential energy, and at 1, you will have a lesser potential energy. Due to the change in potential energy, what is going to happen is its speed is also going to change. Correct? Now let's apply and see. Half. So what does Bernoulli's theorem state? The pressure energy plus kinetic energy plus potential energy per unit volume. So pressure energy per unit volume is pressure plus kinetic energy per unit volume is half rho v square plus potential energy per unit volume is always a constant. This will be equal to, so P1 rho 1 V1 square rho 1 GH1 P2 plus half into rho 2 V2 square plus rho 2 GH2. There is something wrong in what I wrote. Correct it.
So the density.
Yes, because I told it's ideal fluid, its density has to be constant. Okay, and according to this question, there is something else that I need to connect. There is some important information given. Assume something.
Pressure is constant.
So as a result of which,
P1 equal to
P1,
P2.
that's it. So P1 is equal to P2. So those two things will get cancelled. Half rho into V2 square minus, or I will write V1 square minus V2 square is equal to rho G into H2 minus H1. So rho will also get cancelled. Right. Now one unknown, one equation. Can you find it out? Oh, sorry. Varun, what you told is right. I'm sorry. I thought the cross-sectional area is not varying. There was, what is the cross-sectional area of the stream, right?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, you're right. So half into, so first find out what is the velocity at point 1. Once you get that, then you will have A1 V1 is equal to A2 V2. From that, you can find the area of cross-section. Can you guys do it fast and let me know? So 0.15, write it as 15 by 100. Since all are multiples of 5, I think it should be easy to solve. Try and see. V2 is 2 meter per second, correct?
Yes.
So A1 V1 is equal to A2 V2. According to this problem, A1 is what we need to find. A1 into what is the value of V1 guys? 1 is equal to A2 is 10 power minus 4 into V2 is 1. V2 is 2. Did I do any mistake?
Sorry, A1 is 10 power minus 4.
So V1 is 2, right? Sorry. Yeah. So A1 is 10 power minus 4 into V1 is 2 is equal to A2 into V2.
Sir, V1 is 1 only, sir. V2 is 2.
V1 is, sorry. V1 is 1 and V2 is 2. So A2 will be 1 by 2 into 10 power minus 4. That will be 5 into 10 power minus 5 meter per second. No, meter square. No. So that will be 5 into 10 power 5 minus 5 meter square. Yes. So this is the case. So third onwards, we will solve it in the next class. Okay, next class we'll do only problems. Later we can go to the surface tension concept. Okay. So one important announcement is, see, since your CBSE exams are postponed and the number of JEE attempts have increased, I'll be holding a session, if possible, today evening or someday this week after I prepare the presentation, where I'm going to discuss about the strategy you need to follow to prepare for your boards as well as for your JEE, so that you're balancing both and you're not worried about it. Okay. So I'll be holding about it. In the meanwhile, if you people have any doubt, you can message me on this number. 6369210899. If you have any doubts or anything else, you can message me on this number. So you'll be getting an update stating there will be a meeting, there will be a small presentation regarding the ideas to be for the steps to be followed for your preparation for JEE as well as boards, how to balance both JEE and board exams. Okay. So I'm preparing a presentation. Once it is ready, I'll give you an announcement. And also in that, I will show you how to use the software to make sure that you're able to write tests as well as take assignments and practice yourself. There will be certain tests that I'll be assigning, and there will be certain tests which you yourself can assign based on your pace, and you can solve them. That also I'll be showing a demo of. Okay. So maximum I'll try to do it by today itself, or else I'll do it in 2 or 3 days. So please be prepared for it. I'll do it in the evening. Okay. Is there any other doubt, guys?
No, sir.
Okay, just a minute.